For 37 days, the girl handed the same man a sandwich at exactly 6:15 in the evening. She never asked his name. He never offered it. He sat on the same wooden bench outside the subway entrance, coat worn at the edges, beard uneven, shoes tired from more miles than they could handle. To everyone else, he was invisible. Just another homeless man blending into the rush of the city. But on the 38th day, something was different. As she placed the brown paper bag into his hands, she apologized softly. "I'm sorry. It's just leftovers today." He looked at her, not at the food, at her. And for the first time, his smile wasn't grateful. It was certain. Across the street, a black luxury car sat quietly with its engine running, tinted windows, watching. Inside, a man in a tailored suit checked his watch. "Is this her?" he asked. "Yes, sir." The engine never turned off. At that exact moment, miles away in a glass tower downtown, an emergency board meeting had just been called. Stocks were shifting. Phones were ringing. A decision worth billions was waiting for a signature, and somehow, it was connected to a girl who could barely afford her own rent. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had been feeding every evening wasn't just another stranger, and by the end of the week, her life would never be the same again. The girl worked at a small downtown diner that never truly felt clean, no matter how many times the counters were wiped down. Coffee stains, grace in the air, neon lights that flickered like they were tired too. Her shift started before sunrise. By the time the city fully woke up, she had already poured 24 coffees, memorized 3 regular orders, and forced more smiles than she could count. She wasn't broke, but she was close enough to it that every unexpected expense felt like a threat. Rent overdue. Phone screen cracked. A message from home asking if she could send a little extra this month. She always replied, of course, even when she didn't know how. And yet, every evening at exactly 6:15, she wrapped a sandwich in brown paper and walked toward the subway entrance. Not because she had extra, but because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing. The first time she saw the man on the bench, it was raining. People rushed past him as if stillness were contagious. He wasn't asking for money, wasn't holding a sign. He was just sitting there watching. She had hesitated, then handed him half her lunch. "Thank you," he had said. His voice didn't match his appearance. It was calm, educated. After that, it became routine, day after day, same bench, same time. Sometimes he would ask her small questions. "What's the hardest part of your day?" She laughed once, pretending, "I'm not tired." He nodded like he understood exhaustion from a different world. Other days, he would just observe the crowd. "Everyone's in a hurry," he once said. "Maybe they're late," she replied. "Or maybe they're afraid to stop." That answer lingered longer than it should have. "Let me ask you something. If you walked past the same person every day, would you eventually stop seeing them?" Because that's what the city does. It turns people into background noise. But she never let him become background noise. One evening after a long shift, she sat beside him instead of standing. "I might lose my job," she admitted quietly. He didn't react with surprise. "Why?" "Owner says I care too much about customers who don't tip." He almost smiled. Kindness rarely makes profit in the short term. That sounds like business advice. Maybe it is. She studied him then. There were details that didn't match the story her eyes were telling. His posture was straight, not slouched. His hands, though roughened, weren't broken or trembling. The way he folded the sandwich wrapper neatly instead of tossing it aside. The way he scanned the street, not nervously but strategically, as if he were memorizing patterns. And once, when a luxury car drove past too quickly, splashing water near the curb, he glanced at it instinctively, not with resentment, with recognition. But she didn't question it. Maybe because questioning would complicate something simple. He never once asked her for money, never hinted at needing anything beyond the sandwich. In fact, when she apologized for bringing less one evening, he said, "You've already given more than you realize." That sentence stayed with her. Because it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like certainty. Have you ever helped someone and felt like you were the one receiving something instead? That's what this felt like. She thought she was feeding a man who had nothing, but every conversation left her feeling steadier. Sin, understood. On the 20th day, he asked her something unexpected. "If your life changed tomorrow, what would you keep the same?" She blinked. "What do you mean? If everything improved, money? Stability, comfort. What would you refuse to lose?" She thought about it, then said quietly, "My ability to care." He looked at her longer than usual, as if measuring that answer, as if it mattered more than she knew. Across the street, unnoticed by her, the same black car rolled by slowly again, not stopping, just observing, timing, waiting. And if you were watching closely, you'd realize something important was unfolding. Not random, not accidental, deliberate. Because sometimes the biggest decisions in the world are influenced by the smallest acts no one else sees. And the girl still believed she was just sharing food with a stranger. She had no idea. She was standing at the center of something far bigger than herself. Around the 25th day, the pattern shifted. Not in something obvious, not in the way movies show you. No dramatic music, no sudden reveal. Just small cracks. The girl noticed it first in the way he listened. Not casually, not politely, intensely. As if every word she spoke carried weight. That evening, she was quieter than usual. He sensed it. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. She blinked. "What? This city?" She stiffened slightly. "I never said that. You didn't have to." She laughed it off, but something about his tone unsettled her. It wasn't a guess. It was an observation. "How would you know that?" she asked. He looked toward the street. "Because people who feel trapped look at buildings differently." She followed his gaze. "What does that even mean?" "They don't see windows. They see exits." That line hit harder than she expected. Because he was right. Every day during her break, she would stare at the skyline, not admiring it, measuring it, wondering what it would feel like to belong somewhere inside those towers instead of serving coffee beneath them. She had never told anyone that. Not even her closest friend. Yet somehow, he knew. On day 27 it happened. She handed him the sandwich as usual. But when he reached for it, his sleeve shifted slightly. Just for a second. Long enough for her to see the edge of a watch. Not broken. Not cheap. It wasn't flashy either. But it was refined. Minimal. The kind of watch that didn't scream wealth. It whispered it. He noticed her eyes drop. Calmly, he adjusted his sleeve. She didn't mention it. But the question planted itself in her mind. How does a homeless man own a watch like that? And more importantly, why would he still be sitting on a bench? The call. 2 evenings later, she arrived early 60:05 instead of 60:15. The bench was empty, her stomach tightened unexpectedly. She hadn't realized how much she expected him to be there. She waited 60:12, still nothing. Then she saw him walking toward the bench from the corner. But he wasn't alone. He was speaking into a small device in his hand. Not loudly, not urgently controlled. "Delay the decision until Friday," he said calmly. She froze, his tone had changed. Gone was the quiet, reflective voice she knew. This one was firm, authoritative, used to being obeyed. He noticed her, and in one smooth motion, ended the call. The device disappeared into his coat pocket. For a split second, they just looked at each other. "You're early?" he said. "So are you," she replied. Silence, then she asked it. "Who were you talking to?" He didn't hesitate. "A friend." That didn't sound like a casual conversation. He studied her carefully. "You pay attention." That's not an answer. A small smile formed. Not all truths are useful before their time. That answer did not comfort her. The black luxury car appeared more frequently now. Always across the street, never parked directly in front. Windows tinted, engine running. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But on day 30, she tested it. After giving him the sandwich, she casually walked past the car. The engine hummed softly. Inside, silhouettes, not random men. Men in suits, one of them watching the bench through a tablet screen. She felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't coincidence. She turned back toward him. He was watching her now, not panicked, not worried, just observant. "Do you know them?" she asked quietly when she returned. "Ooh, the car." He paused for half a second. "Sometimes," he said, "people watch what they don't understand." That's not an answer either. You're asking the wrong question. Then what's the right one? He held her gaze. Why would anyone watch you? The air felt heavier, because that question was more dangerous than the one she asked. The next evening, she didn't bring food. She wanted to see his reaction. She approached the bench empty-handed. "I couldn't afford it today," she said. He didn't look disappointed, didn't even look surprised. Instead, he reached into his coat, her breath caught. But he didn't pull out money. He pulled out a small folded napkin. He placed it between them. Inside was half of yesterday's sandwich, saved. "You don't owe me consistency," he said calmly. "You owe yourself dignity." She stared at him. Most people in his position would have been upset, frustrated, hungry. But he seemed steady, as if the sandwich was never the point. "Why are you really here?" she asked softly. That was the first time she asked it directly. He looked at the skyline again. "I needed to see something for myself. See what? If kindness still exists without incentive. Her throat tightened. And I found my answer. That wasn't relief in his voice. It was resolution. That night, back in her small apartment, she turned on the TV. She rarely watched the news, but something caught her attention. A major corporation was in crisis. Stocks unstable. Leadership dispute. The headline flashed across the screen. CEO missing for over a month. Board silent on location. A blurred photo appeared. Older image. Clean-shaven. Sharp suit. But the eyes. Her heart dropped. It couldn't be. No, that was impossible. She moved closer to the screen. The beard in the photo was gone. The hair styled differently. But the posture, the intensity, the way he held himself, it was him. Or someone who looked exactly like him. The name appeared beneath the image. One of the most powerful businessmen in the country. Billionaire, investor, philanthropist. Disappeared without explanation. Her hands started shaking. No, she whispered. She grabbed her phone. Searched the name, more photos, interviews, speeches. And there it was. The same calm voice. The same measured tone. The same habit of pausing before answering difficult questions. The man on the bench. The man she had been feeding for 30 days. Was not homeless. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. And according to the news, he was missing. The next evening, she walked toward the bench with a storm inside her. He was already there, calm as ever, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. "You lied to me," she said before even sitting down. He didn't react. "I never told you a lie. You let me believe you were homeless. I let you believe what you chose to see. That's manipulation." "No," he said quietly. "It's observation." She felt anger rising. "Why?" He looked at her. Really looked at her. "Because power distorts truth. I needed distance from it. And I was what? An experiment." His jaw tightened slightly. "You were proof. Proof of what?" "That integrity isn't extinct." Silence fell between them. Cars passed. City noise blurred. "You could have told me," she said, "and changed your behavior." She didn't answer. Because he was right. If she had known who he was, would she have acted the same? Would she have been as honest? As open? As unfiltered? Probably not. That realization unsettled her more than the lie. "Why stay this long?" she asked. "Because decisions are being made," he replied quietly. "Decisions that will affect thousands of lives." "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything." Her breath caught. Because suddenly, this wasn't about kindness anymore. It wasn't about sandwiches. It wasn't even about him. It was about something bigger. And somehow, she was standing at the center of it, as the black car pulled up closer than ever before. As two suited men stepped out but didn't approach yet, he turned to her and said, "Tomorrow, I return to my world." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. "And tonight?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Tonight, you decide if you want to be part of it." The next evening, the bench was empty. No worn coat, no quiet posture, no brown paper bag exchange, just cold wood under fading daylight. The girl stood there longer than she should have, maybe hoping he'd appear from the corner again, maybe hoping the last 30 days had been a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Across the street, the black car didn't just pass by this time, it stopped. The back door opened. A suited man stepped out, not rushed, not aggressive, respectful. "Miss," he said calmly. "He asked us to bring you." Her pulse spiked. "Bring me where?" The man gestured toward the car. "He's waiting." Every instinct told her to walk away. Normal people don't get invited into tinted black cars. Normal lives don't collide with billionaires. But her feet moved before her fear could stop them. Inside, the leather seats smelled new. The door shut softly behind her. The city blurred as they drove. No one spoke. 10 minutes later, the car slowed in front of a glass tower that touched the sky. She had walked past this building hundreds of times, never once imagining she'd enter it. The lobby doors opened automatically. Marble floors, polished silence. Security guards who didn't question her presence. Because they already knew. The elevator ride felt longer than it was. Top floor, private access. The doors opened, and there he was. Not in a worn coat, not on a wooden bench, but in a perfectly tailored suit. Hair trimmed, beard cleaned, posture commanding. He didn't look different. He looked revealed. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The man she had handed sandwiches to now stood at the head of a long conference table overlooking the entire city. Board members sat along both sides. Serious faces, expensive watches. Tension thick in the air, he turned toward her. And in that room full of power, his focus was only on her. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was the same. Calm. Measured, but now it echoed with authority. One board member leaned forward. This is highly irregular, he muttered. He didn't break eye contact with her. Yes, he replied smoothly. It is. She finally found her voice. Why am I here? He walked toward her slowly. Because for the past month, this company has been deciding whether to close 3 manufacturing branches. Her stomach tightened. Close them. Over 2,000 employees, he continued. Families. Rent. Medical bills. She glanced at the board members. Some avoided her gaze. Others studied her curiously. And what does that have to do with me? She asked. He stopped a few feet away. For 30 days I removed myself from power. Silence. I wanted to see how people behave when there's nothing to gain. He looked at the room. I wanted to see if empathy still exists without profit. Then back at her. You showed me it does. The room shifted uncomfortably. One board member cleared his throat. With respect, sir, corporate decisions cannot be based on emotional anecdotes. He turned slowly. And he agreed. They can't. He walked back to the head of the table. They must be based on values. A file was placed in front of him. Final proposal. Signatures pending. He picked up the pen, paused, looked at her. If you had the power to decide, he asked quietly, what would you protect? The question hit her like it had on the bench weeks ago. If everything improved, what would you refuse to lose? Her answer hadn't changed. People, she said softly. Simple, unpolished, honest. He nodded once, then signed the document. Gas rippled lightly across the table. The branches remain open, he announced. We restructure executive bonuses instead. One board member protested. That will cost the company millions. He met his gaze steadily. So does losing integrity. Silence. Because no one in that room could argue with the man who controlled majority shares. Decision made. He placed the pen down, then walked back toward her. This was never about charity, he said quietly so only she could hear. It was about direction. She looked overwhelmed. I don't belong here. A faint smile appeared. You belonged on that bench. And that, he added, is why you belong here. The city lights reflected behind him. Power, influence, control. And yet, in that moment, he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had found something rare. Not an employee, not a publicity stunt, not an assistant, but perspective. Tomorrow, he said softly, I'd like you to return. Her heartbeat quickened. For what? A conversation about your future. The doors behind them opened as board members slowly exited. Whispers filling the room. She stood there, between 2 worlds, the one she came from, and the one now inviting her in. And for the first time, she realized something important. He hadn't been testing her kindness. He had been testing himself. By morning, the city knew. Every major news channel carried the same headline. Missing billionaire returns, makes shocking corporate decision. Footage of him entering the glass tower looped endlessly. Speculation exploded. Why had he disappeared? Where had he been? Who influenced his sudden shift in leadership strategy? But no one knew about the bench. Not yet. The girl stood behind the counter at the diner, watching the television mounted above the coffee machine. Customers whispered. Crazy story. They say he vanished on purpose. Probably some PR stunt. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. Because she knew something they didn't. It wasn't a stunt. It was a test. And somehow she had been part of it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she hesitated. Then answered. Good morning, came his calm voice. Even through the speaker it carried weight. I hope the headlines aren't overwhelming. She swallowed. This is insane. Yes, he replied softly. It is. There was a pause. I meant what I said, he continued. I'd like you to come in today. For what? For an opportunity? Her heart raced. What kind of opportunity? One that aligns with who you already are. That answer both intrigued and terrified her. An hour later, she stood once again in the glass tower. But this time security greeted her by name. That alone felt surreal. Inside his office, sunlight poured through floor, tip-ceiling windows. The city looked smaller from up there. He stood near the window when she entered. No cameras. No board members, just him. You look uncomfortable, he observed. I am. That's honest. She crossed her arms slightly. Why me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a thin folder. Inside were reports, internal evaluations, community impact assessments, plans for a new initiative. I'm launching a foundation, he explained, focused on small business support, worker protection and community-based hiring. She looked confused. That's good. But what does that have to do with me? I want you to help design it. She blinked. I serve coffee. You understand people, he corrected calmly. That's rarer. She let out a nervous laugh. You're serious. Completely. He walked toward his desk. For years I've made decisions based on numbers. He tapped the folder. This time I want decisions influenced by reality. And you think I represent reality? I think you represent integrity. The word landed heavy. Why would I accept this? She asked quietly. Better salary. He suggested lightly. She didn't smile. That's not enough. He nodded slowly. Good. Silence stretched between them. Then he said something that changed everything. You once told me you were afraid of losing your job because you cared too much about customers who didn't tip. Her throat tightened. I remember. I don't want you to lose that part of yourself. He met her eyes. I want to build something that protects it. The room felt smaller, more intense. People will say I'm part of some publicity move, she said. They already are, he replied calmly. Let them. She paced slightly. This is a different world.
Wes.
I don't belong in boardrooms. You didn't belong on a bench either, he said gently. And yet, that stopped her, because deep down, she knew something had shifted inside her too. Not ambition, not greed, perspective. She had seen power without its mask, and it had chosen to listen. What exactly would I be doing? She asked finally. He sat across from her, meeting workers, visiting branches, listening to concerns executives don't hear. Why can't you do that? Because when I walk into a room, he said honestly, people filter themselves. She understood that. But when you walk in, he leaned back slightly. They speak. The weight of the offer pressed against her fear. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't about romance. It was about influence and responsibility. Why trust me? She whispered. He didn't hesitate. Because for 30 days, you helped someone who had nothing to offer you in return. That silence again. Heavy. Real. Outside the window, the city moved as usual. Unaware that inside this office, a life was pivoting. She exhaled slowly. What if I fail? He smiled faintly. Then we adjust. What if I change? That's inevitable. He stood. And if at any point you feel you're losing the part of yourself that sat on that bench, he paused. You walk away. No contracts forced across the table. No pressure. Just choice. And maybe that was the real power. She looked down at the folder again, then back at him. When do we start? His expression softened. Tomorrow. As she left the tower later that day, the sunlight felt different, brighter, heavier. The bench outside the subway entrance was still there. Empty. But it no longer felt like the center of her world. It felt like the beginning of it. And across the street, for the first time in weeks, there was no black car waiting. Her first official day didn't start with confidence. It started with headlines. By 8:12 a.m., her name wasn't public yet, but her existence was. Unknown woman influenced billionaire's decision, mystery figure behind corporate shift, emotional manipulation or strategic genius. She stared at her phone. Comments were brutal. Gold digger, acting humble, another publicity pawn. Let me ask you something. If the world judged you before knowing your story, would you still stand where you chose to stand? Because that's exactly where she was, standing in front of the glass tower again. Except this time, cameras waited outside. Microphones lifted the second she stepped out of the car. Are you the reason he changed his decision? Were you paid before this? Are you in a relationship with him? She froze for half a second, then remembered something. The bench. How she used to walk past staring eyes without reacting. She kept walking. Inside, the atmosphere felt different, not welcoming, measured, polite, but tense. Executives watched her like an experiment that had gone too far. In the conference room, he stood at the head of the table again. But today, he didn't introduce her as an assistant. He didn't introduce her as charity. He said something unexpected. This is the person who reminded me what this company was built for. Silence. One executive leaned back. With respect, sir, inspiration doesn't equal experience. She felt the sting of that. He didn't defend her immediately. Instead, he looked at her. Would you like to respond? Her heart pounded. This wasn't the diner. No coffee to hide behind. No counter between her and judgment. She inhaled slowly. You're right, she said calmly. I don't have experience in corporate finance. A few subtle smirks appeared around the table. But I have experience living paycheck to paycheck. Silence. I know what happens when a branch closes. No one interrupted. I know what it feels like when decisions made in rooms like this change someone's entire life. Now the smirks faded. I'm not here to replace expertise. She held their gaze. I'm here to remind you who your expertise affects. The room went still, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. He didn't clap, didn't praise her. He just nodded once. Meeting continued. But the tone had shifted. By noon, She accompanied him to one of the manufacturing branches that had almost been shut down. Workers gathered, some skeptical, some hopeful, most confused. Rumors had spread fast. A worker stepped forward. "You're the girl from the news." She hesitated. "Yes." He crossed his arms. "Why should we trust you?" That question hit deeper than the executive's comments. Because this wasn't ego. This was survival. She walked closer. "You shouldn't," she said honestly, murmurs. "But you can judge me by what I listened to." She spent hours that day not speaking, but listening. Single mothers worried about overtime cuts, older workers afraid of being replaced, young employees desperate for growth. She wrote everything down. No promises, no speeches, just attention. And here's something important. Have you noticed how rare it is for someone powerful to actually listen? That's what made this different. Not money, not status, presence. Later that evening, back in his office, she looked exhausted. "You handled that well," he said. "I didn't feel like I did. You weren't supposed to." She sat down heavily. "This is bigger than I thought." "Yes." He didn't sugarcoat it. "People will attack you. They already are. Some inside this building want you to fail." She looked up sharply. "I can tell." He studied her carefully. "Do you regret saying yes?" The question lingered, and maybe you're wondering the same thing right now. Was it worth stepping into this chaos? She thought about the bench again, about the quiet conversations, about the question he once asked her. If everything improved, what would you refuse to lose? My ability to care. That hadn't changed. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it." He didn't smile widely, but something in his expression softened. "Good." Her phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. Someone had taken a picture of her sitting on the subway bench weeks ago. With him. Before the reveal, the caption online read, "From sandwiches to skyscrapers." She stared at it. That bench had been private. Sacred almost, now it was content. Public narrative. Her chest tightened. "Do you ever miss being unknown?" She didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he admitted. "Every day." Silence filled the room. "But anonymity," he added softly, "doesn't protect impact." That line stayed with her. Because suddenly she understood. This wasn't just about stepping into power. It was about carrying visibility. And visibility is heavy. As she left the tower that night, cameras flashed again. Voices shouted. Questions thrown like accusations. But this time, she didn't lower her head. She walked straight through. Because something had shifted. Not in the world, in her. And the real test? It hadn't even begun yet. The attack didn't come from outside. It came from inside. 3 weeks after her appointment, an internal memo was leaked to the press. Selective screenshots, twisted narratives, headlines exploded again. Unqualified woman driving billion-dollar decisions, emotional influence over corporate stability. Stock prices dipped, investors panicked. Board members demanded an emergency meeting. She sat at the long conference table again. But this time the energy wasn't skeptical. It was hostile. One executive didn't bother hiding it. "This experiment has cost us credibility." Another added, "Public perception matters." She felt the weight of their words pressing down. He remained calm at the head of the table. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked evenly. That she steps down. Silence. Her chest tightened. This was it, the moment critics had predicted. The waitress who didn't belong. The girl from the bench. About to be erased. He didn't immediately defend her. Instead, he looked at her, again giving her the choice. Do you want to fight? Or walk away? Have you ever been in a room where everyone silently agrees you shouldn't be there? That was this room. Her hands trembled slightly under the table. Then she remembered something small. Not the boardroom. Not the headlines. The first rainy day. The half sandwich. The simple decision to stop walking. She stood up. I'll speak. Some board members rolled their eyes. But she continued. You're right about one thing. The room quieted. I'm not traditional. A faint smirk from across the table. But neither was this company when it started. Now the smirk faded. She walked slowly toward the window overlooking the city. This company was built by someone who believed business could create opportunity. She turned back toward them, not just profit. Eyes shifted toward him. You're afraid I'll damage credibility. She nodded slowly. But credibility isn't built by avoiding risk. She let that sit. It's built by standing behind your values when it costs you something. Silence. Raw. Uncomfortable. Real. And if my presence truly threatens this company, she inhaled, then your foundation was never strong to begin with. The room went still. No one clapped. No dramatic music. Just truth hanging in the air. He stood up then, and for the first time since she entered his world, His voice carried unmistakable force. She's not stepping down. No hesitation. No further discussion. A few executives exchanged frustrated looks, but no one challenged him directly, because power when steady doesn't need to shout. Meeting adjourned. Hours later, news broke of internal tension. Reporters gathered again outside the tower. This time, he walked out beside her. Cameras flashed violently. One reporter shouted, "Was this all a social experiment?" He stepped toward the microphones.
Yes.
The crowd went silent. For 30 days, I stepped away from privilege. More silence. I wanted to see if kindness still existed without incentive. He turned slightly toward her. "I found it." Another reporter asked, "And what does that prove?" He didn't look away from the cameras. "That leadership without empathy is empty." The clip went viral within hours. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. That evening she asked him to stop the car. Not at the tower, not at a restaurant, but near the subway entrance. The bench was still there, unchanged, unimpressed by headlines. She walked toward it slowly. Sat down. For a moment neither of them spoke. City noise blended into the background. "Do you regret disappearing?" she asked quietly. He looked at the skyline. "No." "Do you regret coming back?" A pause. "No." She nodded slowly. "I was happier when no one knew who I was." He smiled faintly. "I was poorer." She looked at him. "You weren't poor." "I was," he said softly, in perspective. That settled something inside her, all of it. The headlines, the backlash, the boardroom tension. It wasn't about status. It wasn't about money. It was about remembering. Remembering what matters before power rewrites it. She looked at the empty sidewalk in front of them. "Do you think we would have met if you weren't on this bench?" He thought about it. "No." "And if I hadn't stopped," he met her eyes, "then I would have lost something far more valuable than money. Silence. Comfortable now." The city rushed past them again, people moving quickly, eyes forward, missing the stillness. And here's the real question. How many lives change? Because someone decided to stop walking. After a few minutes, she stood. He stood too. The black car waited at the corner. But this time, it didn't feel like surveillance. It felt like transport, opportunity, responsibility, choice. She looked at the bench one last time. Not as a memory, not as a symbol of charity, but as a reminder that the smallest actions often sit at the beginning of the biggest stories. And somewhere in the city, someone walked past a stranger that night, without stopping.